like to welcome you to our study of Obadiah. This is going to be a five-part study. Now, if you open up your Bible, you'll find that the book of Obadiah is actually a very small book, very short, as a matter of fact. And you might wonder, how in the world can we split this up into five pieces? Well, there's a lot for us to know and learn in this book of Obadiah to figure out what it's talking about, who it's talking about, what period of time it's talking about. So, we're going to split it up. Literally, in this very first study, all we're going to do is touch on the very first verse of Obadiah. But you're welcome to read the whole book, the whole chapter, because as we go through the five parts, it will be very valuable for you to have in your mind kind of an idea of what it all says in this chapter. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to start in verse 1, and then we're going to go and figure out who this is talking about, where they lived, who they are, and all of that, so that we can proceed with a little bit more sure footing in the rest of the chapter. So, verse 1, Obadiah. The vision of Obadiah, thus saith the Lord God, concerning who? Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us arise up against her in battle. And so this is a chapter that's specifically focused on the people of Edom. So our first question is, who are the Edomites? Where do they come from? And on the left-hand side here, you can see we have a map. We have a map of the Middle Eastern area, the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah. We have the kingdom of Aram, Damascus, the kingdom of the Ammonites, the kingdom of the Moabites, the Philistine states, and the yellow kingdom of Edom. And this is kind of the breakdown of the way things will look over time. In the kingdom of Edom, we have two places here that are really important for our study in particular. One is the mountain of Seir that we're going to talk about, and the other is Petra. Petra, two different areas that we're going to come and talk about in the course of this study. Speaking of the Mount of Seir, let's read Genesis chapter 36, verses 6 and 8. And Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all the persons of his house and his cattle and his beasts and all of his substance which he had got in the land of Canaan, and went into the country from the face of his brother Jacob. Thus Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. And so right away we know who Esau is and who Edom is. Well, we know who Edom is. It's Esau. And we're going to see through the course of this first study who Esau is and how he comes into play. But what we know here is that Esau separates himself from his brother Jacob and goes to the Mount Seir. That's where the red star is in the kingdom of Edom. Travels away, separates himself with all of his possessions. That whole yellow area eventually becomes their area. Now, I just want to point out for a moment, on the right-hand side or the east side of the kingdom of Edom, you have the Nabattu tribes. This is going to come up later on in our studies a little bit, because they end up actually taking over most of the area of the kingdom of Edom. And the Edomites are going to move. And we'll see that through the course of this study. But first off, let's go and look at a little bit of information about Esau. And so Genesis chapter 25, verse 25 and 26 says, And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. And so we have Isaac and Rebekah, mother and father, Jacob and Esau. These are the two boys. They're brothers. They're actually twins. They came out, but they don't look like twins. They're not identical twins in any way, shape, or form. Esau, when he comes out, he's very hairy, and he's got kind of a reddish, goldish tinted hair and skin, where Jacob, on the other hand, is not hairy. And we know that, and we will find that out later on in the story, I should say, because Jacob is going to steal the blessing out from under Esau, and he's going to need to have hairy arms to be able to get that blessing. And so the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, this is the descendants of Jacob, the kingdom of Edom, the descendants of Esau. And so these are brothers, these are families, both of these groups. And yet they're going to be at conflict for most of their existence. And so the red that we have here, when it says that Esau came out red, it's kind of a reddish, ruddy, or kind of a reddish gold type coloration. So the hairs of his arms were probably more of a blondish, reddish gold color, where his skin was more reddish. And that's where you got the kind of the distinction between the two colors. So let's go on in verse 30 and 31. And Esau said to Jacob, "Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint." Therefore was his name called Edom. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." And so Esau had been out hunting, and he came back. He was famished. He didn't have a very productive day. Jacob, who was more of a homebody, apparently more of a chef, had some good pottage ready. In walks Esau. He smells the aroma. He smells the wonderful, flavorful smells, and says, "Why don't you give me some food?" Jacob takes advantage of his brother, who seems to probably be driven by his stomach, takes advantage of it and says, "Look, I got the food, and yeah, it smells great. We have some wonderful herbs in here, some wonderful flavors. They come out and they just kind of tug at your stomach. Tell you what, I'll give you a bowl, you give me the birthright." Now, the birthright's very important in the culture of the Old Testament. Typically speaking, the firstborn son, which in this case is Esau, the firstborn son would receive a double portion of the inheritance. So if, for instance, whatever Isaac's property is, rather than being divided 50-50 between Esau and Jacob, it would be divided three ways. The firstborn would receive 2 portions, the lastborn would receive 1. When we think about Jacob and the fact that he had 12 sons, well, he wouldn't have divided his inheritance in 12 parts, he would have divided into 13, because the firstborn gets the birthright, which is a double portion. Not only does he get the birthright, but the other part of the birthright is being the leader of the family. So when Isaac dies, Esau would become the patriarch. But if he sells the birthright, then he's no longer got the rights to being the patriarch. Now Jacob's going to be the patriarch. Now we know historically that God intended for Jacob to have all the blessings, but that doesn't mean he got it the right way, and that's important. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 27, and we're just going to read part of the story. You're welcome to read all of it. It's a really good story to give you more insight into the people we're talking about. Genesis 27, verse 32 through 41. Isaac was going to be giving his blessing to his firstborn son, Esau. And so this is not the birthright. This is a blessing. This is separate. This is what they called the patriarchal blessing. And so what he did is he told Esau, "Go out, go hunting. I'm, feeling like I'm probably on my deathbed. Bring back my favorite catch from the wild, cook it up, give me some meat, and I'll give you the blessing." Well, Rebecca's listening in on this conversation between Isaac and Esau. And Esau was the favorite for Isaac. Rebecca, her favorite was Jacob. Whether it was her favorite because it was her favorite, or whether it's because she knew God had promised that Jacob would receive the blessing, can't really say. I suspect, being as Jacob was more of a homebody, stuck around, learned how to cook, that's kind of how he probably ended up being his favorite of his mother. But Rebecca overhears this conversation. No sooner does Esau leave, and she runs, grabs Jacob and said, "Look, your father is about to give the blessing to Esau. You need that blessing. You need to have it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to kill a kid goat. We're going to fry it up, barbecue it just the way your dad likes it, and you're going to go in and feed it to him. And you're going to tell him that you are Esau." Jacob's a little bit worried because he does not have a hairy arm. And he's worried his father is going to touch his arm, find out that he doesn't have hair on his arm, and going to say, "Hey, who are you?" which he did in the story. And this is right before verse 32. As I said, you can go back and read it. But what his mother does is put the skin of the goat with the hair on it on Jacob's arms, thus giving him hairy arms. He presents himself to his father. His father has a gut feeling that this is not Esau, but he goes with it and he gives Jacob the blessing. Now we're going to read on in verse 32 and 41. In walks Esau, the firstborn. And Isaac his father said unto him, Who art thou? And he said, I'm thy son, thy firstborn, Esau. And Isaac trembled very exceedingly, and he said, Who? Where is he that hath taken venison and brought it to me? And I have eaten of all before thou camest, and have blessed him. Yea, and he shall be blessed. So as I said, Jacob snuck in, brought in the meal, the barbecue, fed his dad. His dad was happy, gave him the blessing, slipped out. Esau comes in again with the barbecue that his dad loves, but his dad's no longer hungry. His dad's already eaten and had his fill and given the first blessing, the patriarchal blessing, to Jacob. Verse 34, and when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, Bless me, even me also, my father. And he said, Thy brother came with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing. And he said, Is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times, and taken away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, Hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, Behold, I have made him thy lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? What's left, is what he's saying. I gave all the best blessings, all the best things to your brother. Verse 38, and Esau said to his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father. And Esau lifted his voice and wept. And we know from the book of Hebrews, you can actually go and find, it says that even with that bitter weep, he did not regain his blessing or his birthright. He didn't get it. And that's important to think about. Verse 39, and Isaac his father answered and said, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And Esau hated Jacob, because of the blessing wherein his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. So we can see a battle is ensuing here. And this battle really goes over multiple generations, from here all the way up to the birth and death of Jesus Christ. And we'll see this as we go through the study. You have 2 brothers here. These are really twins. Again, not identical, but they're twins. Jacob comes in, purchases the firstborn blessing by way of a simple bowl of pottage, red pottage specifically, and then he sneaks in deceptively and gets the blessing, the patriarchal blessing. Now, it's not uncommon actually for there to be multiple patriarchal blessings. We know that Israel, Jacob, gives a patriarchal blessing to all of his children. There was a certain amount of inspiration from God in these blessings. It wasn't just a matter of a father telling his sons, well, I think you're going to be a great painter or an engineer or something like that. There was some divine information coming through these men to their children. But in this case, Isaac only has a blessing for the firstborn. And that ends up being Jacob, even though he's not the firstborn. So we can see on the left-hand side here, there's another map. This is the breakdown of the land of the Canaanites. Now we know that Abraham came from Babylon. He traveled with his father Terah, came over and dwelt in the land of the Canaanites with his wife Sarah. We know that they went into Egypt and they came out of Egypt, and they had a servant, and her name was Hagar. And by way of Hagar, we know that Abraham had his firstborn son, which was Ishmael. And let's just keep that in the background of our mind. As we're looking at this map and we're seeing the breakdown of the Canaanite lands, we know that when Israel comes out of Egypt and actually comes through the desert with Moses and eventually comes in to take possession of the promised land, God actually gives them the order to wipe all these people out for the most part, except for just a couple who God told them not to touch. But for the most part, the people of the Canaanites, God told them to wipe them out because they were evil people. They didn't all get wiped out. We know that the Philistines were a constant thorn in the side of Israel. We know that the Edomites were not all wiped out. The Moabites were not all wiped out. The Amorites were not all wiped out. But many of these other smaller tribes that are in here, you'll only see in the very oldest of the texts. And they disappeared. And so I assume they probably were wiped out. The Girgashites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, and some of these other smaller ones. Anyway, let's go to Genesis chapter 28, verse 1 through 9. And this passage is pretty important to see the distinction of who Jacob was and who Esau was. And it's important because we're going to find that God loved Jacob and hated Esau. Why? Why would God hate anyone? And that is a perplexing problem for most people, because when we talk about God, we talk about a God of love, a God who tells us to love everyone, so to speak. God hated Esau. Why? Because he was rebellious at heart. And that's what we're going to see in this text here. The difference between Esau and Jacob: Jacob was an obedient son. Now, maybe he didn't do everything right the way he did it, but he was an obedient son to his mother, to those who were over him, those who were in charge of him, whereas Esau was rebellious in heart. So let's read Genesis 28, 1 through 9. And Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said unto him, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Now, if we remember, when Noah left the ark, he left with his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Very important, the division of these. Now, Shem is, for the most part, from what we can understand from our oldest texts and the scriptures, Shem is this group over there by Babylon. This is where Abraham comes from, out of Shem. And so his family, Abraham, Sarah, Terah, his father, Tara, his father, these all come from Shem. And they're moving out of Babylon area and coming over to the Canaanite lands. The Canaanite lands, we're going to read in another verse, they come out of Ham. This is important. Japheth went more northwest, probably up into more of the European type area. That's kind of the beginning of his migrations when they get off the ark with Noah. So when Isaac tells Jacob, don't take a daughter of the Canaanites, he's saying, don't take a daughter of those that came from Ham. And we'll see this in a moment. But let's continue in verse 2. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, thy mother's father, and take a wife from thence of the daughters of Laban, thy mother's brother. And God Almighty bless thee, and make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, that thou mayest be a multitude of people, and give thee the blessing of Abraham to thee, and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land wherein thou art a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. And Isaac sent away Jacob, and he went to Padan Aram unto Laban, son of Bethuel, in Syria, and the brother of Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau's mother. And so off Jacob goes, obedient to his father. His father says, don't take of the women of the Canaanites here. Go back to your mother's family. And in our map, the very top right corner, we have the Hivites. Just a little bit farther northeast is where Laban and his family are. And so Jacob's traveling probably from the Amorite, Hittite area there towards the bottom. He's going to be traveling all the way across that map to the northeastern corner, in which he's going to end up at Laban's house, where he's going to find Rachel, who he's going to eventually marry, and she's kind of the one who steals his heart. So he's a very obedient son. He does exactly what his father tells him to do. Esau's listening in. What's he going to do? Let's read on. Verse 6, when Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padanaram to take him a wife from thence, and that as he blessed him, he gave him a charge, saying, thou shalt not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. And that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother, and was gone to Padanaram. And Esau, seeing that the daughters of Canaan pleased not Isaac his father, so we can see the intent. Now, at this very moment, Esau actually has a wife. He actually has, if I'm not mistaken, he's actually got two at this point. But he sees that it's going to needle, it's going to be a slap in the face to his father, because his father doesn't like the Canaanites. And he's upset. He's frustrated. He feels like he's been rejected by his father. So what does he do? Verse 9, then went Esau to Ishmael, and took unto the wives which he had Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth, to be his wife. So he specifically goes out and finds a Canaanite woman to marry, just to needle his father. Who does he marry? One of Ishmael's daughters. So it's not a complete rebellion. We know that Ishmael is Abraham's son, with Hagar, the Egyptian servant. And so Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, she is part from Shem's line, part from Ham's line. And so it's not a complete spite against his father, but it is, because his father said, don't take the women here, the Canaanites. And Esau does it just for spite. So on the right-hand side here, we can see the lines of Shem and the line of Ham. It says Cam because this particular image is in Spanish, but don't mind that. It's the line of Shem and the line of Ham. We can see about halfway down the line of Ham or Cam, we find the name Mizraim, and this is Egyptian. And in Genesis 10, verse 6, we find this name. And the sons of Ham, Cush and Mizraim and Put and Canaan. So these are all the descendants that are coming out of Ham. This is where this Mizraim comes from, and this is where Hagar's coming out of. Genesis 50:11. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, this is a grievous mourning to the Egyptians. Wherefore the name of it was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. And so this word Abel Mizraim, it has kind of two different meanings. The meaning in this particular text is the lamentation of Egypt. It's got a secondary text which means the meadow of Egypt. But in this particular text, it's saying that this area where Mizraim, the family of them lived, is called the lamentation of Egypt, for some things that happened there. And so when we go down to Genesis 16:1, it says, now Sarah, Abraham's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaiden, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. So Hagar is coming through this Egyptian line, this Mizraim line, and coming out of Ham. This is important to think about. This is what Isaac specifically told Jacob not to do. Do not marry into Ham. Now, why he said that, I can't particularly say. I do not think he was racist or anything similar to that, but it was something that he did say, and Esau did it for spite. Now we can see on the left-hand side, there's another image here, and this is the descendants of Terah. Terah was Abraham's father. We can see on the line of Shem, Terah comes out, and about the middle there, we can see this red circle and pointing to Terah. Terah has sons, Haran, Nahor, Abraham. And we know out of Haran comes Lot, who traveled with Abraham. Out of Nahor comes this Bethuel. Bethuel is where Jacob's going, to the family line of Bethuel, specifically to Rebekah's brother, Laban's house. And we can see in the middle there, Nahor, Bethuel, Laban, and Rebekah, their brother and sister. This is where Jacob's going to find a wife. And so Rebekah marries Isaac. So Laban is his uncle. Now Jacob gets up there and he falls in love with Rachel, which we can see right below Laban. This is his daughter. But we know that Laban's actually got two daughters, Leah and Rebekah. And we're not going to go study that story. It's something that you can study on your own. But we know that when Jacob gets there, he falls in love with Rachel. But he ends up being deceived by Laban, and he ends up marrying first Leah, and then later Rachel, and eventually their two servants too. And from those four ladies come the 12 tribes of Israel. So let's read Genesis 29:18. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy daughter. That was how much Jacob loved and adored Rachel. He was willing to work for Laban 7 years to get Rachel. As we know from the story, he did work 7 years. He didn't get Rachel, he got Leah. He had to work another 7 years, and then he got Rachel. And so, as I said, out of these lines come the 12 tribes of Israel. Out of Ishmael, over on the far left-hand side of that left-hand picture, we find Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael. This is who Esau is just married into. And we can see that right below Ishmael. Esau, Mahalath, they get married. We can see the other two that Esau is married to, 3 wives that he had. And so that's the line that Esau is marrying into. So, Romans chapter 9, verse 13. As it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. This is God speaking. This is not, Isaac or Rebekah or anyone like that. This is God speaking. And God loved Jacob, but he did not love Esau the same. He hated him. And I think the only real purpose, only reason that I can find personally, and again, not having lived in that time and being a long time ago and not having good historical documents to give us a better picture, the only thing that I can find that distinguishes these two brothers is one had a heart more of obedience and willing to serve and pursue God and righteousness, whereas the other had a stronger tendency for rebellion, anger, and hatred. And so these are the distinctions in their character. And let's read Genesis 25:23. This is when both Jacob and Esau are still in the womb. And God comes to Rebekah and tells her, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So one of these lines is going to be a stronger people. One of these lines is going to be a weaker people. One of these, the elder, is actually going to serve the younger. Is this why Rebekah liked or loved Jacob more? I can't really say. I suspect Isaac loved Esau more because he was a hunter. He brought in game meat. And Isaac loved this. He loved the man. And it seems to me, by what I can read in the text, that Esau was more of a man's man, where Jacob maybe had a few more feminine qualities. He liked to cook. He stayed home, helped take care of the house, things of that nature. There was a distinction between them anyway. And so what do we know about Esau or Edom? Number one, Esau is the older of the two brothers. He's the one who should have gotten the birthright and the first patriarchal blessing. Number two, he's recognized by at least 2 names, Esau, which means made or formed, and Edom, which means red. Number 3, he was a hunter, and his lineage would always be known as hunters. Number 4, his father loved him more than his brother. Number 5, he sold his birthright for red pottage. Number 6, his brother stole his blessing. Number 7, he lived in Mount Seir. And number 8, it's actually believed that the Roman Empire, the nation of Rome, came out of the descendants of Esau. And that's interesting to think about as we go farther into Obadiah and see the rest of the chapter. we're going to see how all of these things begin to play together. And that's important to think about. Number 9, his skin was a reddish, goldenish, uh, with a lot of hairy covering on his arms. And so now we know a little bit about Jacob and Esau. We know that Esau, out of him came the nation of the Edomites. This prophecy in Obadiah is about the Edomites. And so we're going to see as this develops what God is prophesying to the Edomites. And so I hope this blesses you. This is the first of 5 studies. We're going to be breaking this down, as I said, into 5 studies, even though it's not a big book, because there's a lot to know about the Edomites and all the history around what this prophecy is telling us. And so I hope this blesses you. I hope you have a wonderful day. God bless.